So you probably know mine and Geoff's work possibly, but we're going to be discussing some aspects of both our research today. You know Geoff's work, the 2012 research he's been doing, and the Mayan calendrics, the really detailed analysis that he's been doing over the years. And I've been researching the Olmec civilization of Central America, specifically the area around the Gulf Coast, going down into southern Guatemala and around Mexico City as well. And really our kind of research kind of came together about a year or two ago when we realized perhaps that the origins of the Mayan calendar aren't exactly as what most people think. It wasn't the Mayans who actually came up with it. It seems like either the Olmecs or even an earlier culture before that were responsible for it. And we're going to have a look at some evidence of that. And me and Geoff have known each other for some time. This is something that Geoff decided to put into the slideshow just for fun. It's not just my holiday snaps, it really is some thorough research.
This was taken at the Venus Transit camp in 2004, and the orbs were having a strange effect on us.
And interestingly, the Venus, June 2012 is when the Venus comes in front of the sun again. So there's actually a festival to celebrate that, which we're going to be involved with next year. But anyway, this is what we're going to be sort of discussing today. I'm going to give an overview of the Olmecs, because I don't know if many of you know about the Olmecs, because not many books have been written about them. But if you're looking at it from a megalithic, from an ancient mysterist perspective, there's a surprising amount of interesting things that they were up to, going back a couple of thousand BC or beyond. Then we have this enigmatic date of 3114 BC, which is the beginning of the long count calendar, the one that ends in December the 21st, 2012. Now, why did they start it in 3114 BC? And we'll have a look at some of the theories around that, and also some other cultures around the world that started their sort of cultures around that time. We're going to look at various aspects of the calendar. This is what Geoff's sort of going to be specialising in. And some interesting earth energies turned up when I was in Mexico as well, that sort of link up all around the planet and even connect up with the Michael and Mary lines. So we're going to briefly look at that because we've only got an hour to get through everything. And then there's the amazing Tortuguero monument, which Geoff's been doing some superb research on, along with John Major Jenkins and some others, which actually is the only surviving stone carving with the 2012 end of the calendar date on it. And then we're going to really question, why was that date chosen? Why was the end of the calendar around December 2012? It's pretty soon. It's like a year and a half away. And we either should be getting worried or we should be looking forward to it with great joy. But with Mexico and Guatemala, the first thing you really think of is the Maya. But there have been many other civilizations there going back way before the Maya even existed. Even the Olmecs are supposed to be around from around 2000 BC, 1800 BC perhaps, up to about 200 AD. They really kind of fully died out. And it was around maybe 100 BC, there's various interpretations of this, when the Maya kind of really came in. So there was like a crossover culture, which John Major Jenkins and others believe was around the area of Izapa, and also moving into, which is in Mexico, and also into southern Guatemala. But it's really, what I'm interested in is this area here in the center of this picture, this Olmec heartland, which is really the Gulf Coast region, all along here and down here as well. And also up to Mexico City, there's a surprising amount of Olmec activity up there. And they're even going right down into South America, and possibly even right down into Peru and Bolivia and Colombia and other places. There's evidence that the Olmecs were there too. And the weird thing about the Olmecs, as you'll see in some of these images, is that they don't appear to look particularly kind of native to Central America. This is just the area, but these are the main Olmec sites in that particular. I visited most of these when I was there a couple of years ago. There's a lot of interesting Olmec heads. This is one, for instance, at San Lorenzo. This was only discovered about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. And you get these strange spheres as well on the left here, which are very similar to the ones that have been discovered in Costa Rica, which are all over this certain landscape in Costa Rica. But these Olmec heads, there's 17 of them have been discovered, but they were master stonemasons. They were like sophisticated culture going back a couple of thousand BC. And they really did have a high understanding of various sciences. Magnetism was one of them. And this is some lodestone or an iron ore magnet that was between 1200 and 1400 BC. And also, many of the sites, specifically San Lorenzo, were built on a major magnetic anomaly, as though they deliberately chose that site so they could kind of work with the energies there. And many of the sites in Britain, Europe, and all around the world are actually built upon magnetic anomalies of one sort or another. And this is some new science which has been occurring over the last maybe 6 or 7 years, when this realization's sort of been coming forth. Also with the Olmecs, you'll find there's a lot of connections with Egypt. This is just one graphic I've got here, which compares the two cultures. And I think what's most interesting, you know, the connection with Egypt, or even with certain parts of Africa, is the sort of negroid-looking faces that these great colossal heads have, because they're certainly African-looking, sort of Nubian king-looking almost. I've got some other images we can look at there. But there's a place called San Andreas here, just near one of the major sites of La Venta, which is where we start seeing evidence of the calendar occurring in Mexico before the Maya supposedly existed. Now this is a particularly interesting little site. I didn't manage to get to this site because there's really nothing left of it. But this particular glyph is part of the 260-day Tzolk'in calendar, which Geoff will explain shortly. And it's 3 Ahau, and Ahau is actually is part of the end date of December 21st, 2012. And it's just some cylinder seals that have been discovered there, which I've only just found out about. And here's just some of the other references and connections with Africa, and you can see the similarities in some of these pictures. These are from a book from a guy called Ivan van Sertimo, who's done some brilliant research connecting Africa and Central and South America. And you can see the facial features, especially on the top right there, how they're incredibly similar to a Kenyan Nubian king. And you can clearly see, and yet the academics to this day still claim that the Olmecs are actually just natives to Central America, and this certainly isn't the case. Now, there's lots of other carvings, as we'll see through the talk, which show that there were white people there with beards, and it's known that in Central America that people did not have beards naturally and did not have any facial hair. So there's a suggestion that it may have been a cosmopolitan kind of transoceanic culture which they were part of. This is a place called Santiago Tuxtla. This is near the famous site Tres Zapotes. And what's been noted here, you can see the mounds in the background in the picture that's in the museum. And there's a great head also, another great colossal head just in the main park area, just outside the museum. But on the back of the head, there's these 7 braids. I don't know if you can see it clearly there. And this is a tradition from Kenya. And this is something that Ivan van Sertimo, he kind of came up with and realized. He kept finding all these similarities with Africa and Central America. And whether that's connected with the calendar, we don't know yet, because we don't know if there were sort of particular calendar cultures in that part of Africa. Here's some other heads and stones from Tres Zapotes. Some acoustic properties that many of these stones had as well. When you go in there and you start tapping them, you realise they had quite a knowledge of acoustics. So we can see clearly, you know, that we're starting to see a picture that they were quite sophisticated, and these were the people who really taught the Maya what they knew. And also at Tres Zapotes, there's the long count calendar date that's been found there. This goes to either 31 or 32 BC, and this is the oldest known long count calendar date. Now, the long count's the one that starts in 3114 BC and ends in December 2012. And this goes back to, well, they think 32 BC or 31, it depends which way you look at it. But it's clearly the first carving there. I mean, before the 1950s, the earliest date was in, like, I think AD 200, something like that. And as soon as this was discovered by Matthew Stirling in the 1950s, they realized very quickly that they were looking at a pre-Mayan culture that actually possibly invented this so-called calendar, the 2012 calendar. And here's just some other graphics of it and sort of interpretation, analysis of what was found.
They found the bottom piece first, and the top piece they only found later, but it was actually Matthew Stirling's wife who came up with what turned out later to be the best date for it. Because, where's your pointer? Yeah, you see here, this is the Tzolk'in date, and part of it's missing, so they can see it's probably either a bar is 5 and a dot is 1, so it's either a 6 or a 7 possibly. But then that's 15, 16, 18 there, and then that will be 16, and that's 6, and then 16, but they didn't know what the Bacton's the 400-year cycle. And Stirling's wife said she thought it would be Bacton 7, but that was unacceptable to the archaeologists at the time, because they thought it should be Bacton 8, because they were thinking it should be more within the Maya dating system. But when they eventually found the top piece, they found actually it was Bacton 7, and so the archaeologist's wife was in fact correct. And so that stretched them back in time a little bit further than they wanted to go, but they certainly wouldn't want it to go any further back in time than that, because they will have to rewrite all the work that everyone's done over the years. Okay. So this one, Tortuguero, is even older. This one dates to 36 BC, but that is, again, speculative, because part of it is chipped off. You see, again, you've got, at the bottom there, you've got the Tzolk'in date. You've run out of battery on this one. Which is, again, either 5, 6 or 7. And the day sign that's next to it is probably Ben. And above it, you've got 13, then 2 and 3. So they weren't sure what the next one up above that would say. You've got basically going up from the day sign upwards, you've got the days, then the tuns, 2 tuns, 3 katuns. They've got, so it's the days, the weanals, the tuns, and that's the katuns that are missing, and then the top dotted line is the Bactons. They haven't found the other bit of this, but they've sort of guessed what that might be. So Hugh asked me when he was investigating this to do a projection. We'll come to that in a moment, but first a little word about cogging systems. In order to help people understand calendars, going right back to 1915 with this diagram from Morley's book to show the interaction of the Tzolk'in, the 260-day calendar, with the Harb, the 365-day calendar. He used a cogging diagram to help us understand it. And the Mayanists and academics have always sort of said, well, this is not really how the Maya would think. This is just to help Western minds. But in fact, there is this diagram on the right here from the Chilam-Balan prophecies. And that shows that the Maya were capable of thinking of calendars in terms of interlocking cogging diagrams. And so, in order to explain the 13 Bacton cycle of the long count, I produced, this is a slightly modified version of the diagram in my book. At the bottom we have 13 numbers on a wheel interacting with 20 day signs. But the 20 day signs also doubles as the bottom level of the long count. That's the day numbering system. So, as well as being those two combining at the bottom to make the Tzolk'in, which is 13 weanals, the weanals 20-day cycle, 13 times 20, 260. It's also the bottom level of the long count, so it's 20 days, and then you can, I'll have to do it by hand. Basically, when this goes around once, and it knocks the wheel above around, and each petal on the wheel above is 20. And has it got a better one there? So each wheel on this one is 18, because 18 times 20 is 360, which is 1 ton. Otherwise, it goes up by 20s all the way up. But because it's nearest to the solar year, they used 18 for this one. So, and then when this one at the side is not round, there's 13 petals on this, so that's 13 tons, and that's actually a cycle that's mentioned in the Dresden Codex and the Paris Codex. So going up this way again, 20 tons is 1 katun, 13 katuns here is called the short count. That's the 13 katun cycle that replaced the 13 Bacton cycle after the classic era ended around 900 AD. Going up again here, that one multiplied by 20. 20 katuns is 1 Bacton. This side, when it clicks one of these round, is 1 Bacton. 13 Bactons altogether. That's the 13 Bacton cycle, which started in 3114 BC and ends in 2012. But if there was another cog here with 5, if each of these is one era, as shown in the mythology of the Maya, talks about a series of 5 eras, then if each one's 5,200 tuns, around 5,125 solar years, when that's multiplied by 5 for 5 eras, that would add to 26,000 tuns, one precession of the equinoxes. But, I mean, that explains a lot, the most part of the inscriptions that we find, but there are some inscriptions that can't be explained like that. So recently I've expanded the whole thing to really make smoke come out of your ears. Because this was prompted by some Mayanists recently who've been, what with Roland Emmerich's film coming out about 2012 and the Doomsday connection with that people make. The archaeologists have been interviewed by a lot of media people and asked, you know, is this the end of the world? Did the Maya really predict the end of the world? Because that's what they want for the headline. And the Mayanists really don't want to get involved in that discussion because they know that it'll be taken out of context and they will go their funding and their jobs. So they basically say that's all a load of rubbish, and here's why: because there's not a 13 Bacton cycle, there's a 20 Bacton cycle called a Picton. The trouble is, several of them have said this now, but to make that argument, they're resurrecting an ancient argument from 1915 that raged for years as they discovered more inscriptions and tried to explain them. Some inscriptions implied a 13 Bacton cycle, some implied a 20 Bacton cycle. In 1950, it was settled by Thompson, who basically showed it's not either or. We don't have to have an argument. There's a 13 Bacton cycle for some purposes, 20 Bacton cycle for other purposes, and that is demonstrated in this diagram because for every 20 unit cycle, there's a corresponding 13 unit cycle, and that goes all the way up and it results in at least 3 major ways of making inscriptions. I won't go all into them, but basically 20 of these Bactons makes a Picton, 20 Pictons makes a Calabton, 20 Calabtons makes a Kinchilton, 20 Kinchiltons make a Hableton, and they each have 13. The 13 ones don't have a vertical relationship, whereas the 20-fold ones do. So, what you end up with is the historic scheme. Anything that's recorded with 5 places like this, and you've got the Zolkin, then the Harb calendar, the 365 days, but anything with 5 places in the long count is what I call a historic scheme. But anything with more than that, you have to come up with a different scheme, which uses, it's colour-coded basically, gets up to there and then goes all the way up there. But the historical scheme jumps over to here. And then coming down here, you've got the prophetic scheme, which covers inscriptions at Koba and Yaxchilan, which can't be explained by any other method. And then you've got other dating methods, period-ending dating, short count, which are also covered by my marvellous diagram that explains everything. Thank you. So if you want to do any of these calculations for yourself, they can all be checked on. It's much easier checking with a calculator. You can download this one free. This one only works on PCs and not Mac, Apple Mac. So I've kept my old PC mainly for this purpose, but it's quite good. It does have its limitations. On my website, you'll see where the limitations are and where you have to make allowances. But basically, it gives you the Gregorian date, the Julian date, the correlation you can adjust. It gives you all those things, Pictons, the Calabtons, there's an adjustment for those as well, but you can jump calendar rounds and all sorts of things. It's really a very, very useful tool, and you can download it free. Go to Maya date calculators on my website. But with that tool, this is what I'd use to investigate that thing we were talking about, the Traffic Corso Stella. And as I said, that one, it's definitely got a bar for 5, and another little bit of a bar and something there, so they're looking like it's got to be over 15. Could be 15, anything, well, it could be 10, and that could be something else, but I mean, it's between 10 and 19, basically, that number. So that's either 5 or 6, 6 or 7 Ben. So that gives us a lot of choices. The archaeologists chose the one here, which was the best one that fitted into their theories. But in fact, we could in fact come up with all these other dates as well, and including these ones here, right? These are the ones that Hugh likes best. because it takes it close to the start of the current 13 Bacchus cycle in 3114 BC. And then there's a few more that are mainly the 610 calculations on the next combinations, and this one again. When I say 3114, I mean 3114 BC there. That's calculated in the old style without taking into account the missing year 0. But basically, yeah, 3623 BC, it is possible to sort of posit a possible dating for that, but that goes way back beyond what archaeologists would find acceptable. But this is the thing that Hugh thinks is the case here.
And you also get some glyphs have been discovered at Venta, which is one of the key Olmec sites, which goes back to 1800 BC. These ones here on the bottom left, these strange ones here, it appears to be, there's different interpretations of this really, but there appear to be kind of calendar glyphs of some sort, although officially academia calls him the ambassador, as though he's some kind of Phoenician ambassador. And you actually look at his features, he's got a beard for starters, which you don't get generally in Central America. He's got a strange hat and strange shoes, which they say are Phoenician style. And he's just out of interest, this is when they were excavating Venta on the right-hand side, a very sophisticated water system, which is, some people think they were using it to sort of direct and create charge from the water energy moving through the particular sites, because it's always linked with magnetic anomalies as well. And Venta is just a fascinating place. If anyone's interested in going there, you can actually visit there still. There's actually still the pyramids there. It's the earliest known pyramid in Central America, going back at least 1800 BC. And you can see the layout of the site on the bottom right there. And it's been proven now, and this is something that Andrew Collins mentioned in his book, The Cygnus Mystery, that they actually adjusted the sort of alignment of Venta over various periods of time to take into account the movement of Cygnus, and also they were possibly encoding precession actually into the structures there. So we know that if that's the case, then Venta was designed as like an astronomical tool, therefore a calendar tool. So it gives sort of some other small piece of evidence to back up the idea that the Olmecs may have been working with these calendars before the Maya. On the top right there, just another thing, they actually invented the wheel, which is quite interesting. A wheeled toy has been found actually at Venta and at San Lorenzo as well. But they didn't actually, there's no evidence of them using wheels for anything useful. They just used them for their toys, which I think is quite interesting. Maybe they found them slightly more important. Here's just these are some recently discovered stones. You can't see much with them, but the two on the left there, and the one in the middle on the left, are Olmec heads. These are like Olmec heads 18 and 19 that have been recently discovered at Venta. Here's the only Olmec head that's smiling. The rest look really mean or sad. And that's an unfinished one on the top right there, which gives you some idea of how they could have possibly carved it. It's interesting because there was a Horizon science program on BBC about 7 years ago, and they sent some experts over to Olmec land to try and move like a block the size of one of these Olmec heads from the Tuxtla Mountains, which is about 20 miles away, to an Olmec site. And then another guy, this expert carver from this university in Scotland, was asked to chip and carve these Olmec heads, and they couldn't do any of the things they were meant to do using the traditional tools there. So it just proves that they were more sophisticated than the BBC. Here's just some other stones, an interesting thing. This is a really bizarre one. This is the top of this huge megalith here. This isn't really anything to do with the talk, but I just thought I'd show you some pictures of big stones. Up here is a guy who's kind of flying. He's got a beard and a kind of crash helmet, and he's pointing at someone. Which is kind of really odd. It looks very kind of European-looking features as well, which is something that keeps coming up at these Olmec sites. So you get these kind of African features, and you get these sort of European or Phoenician, even Middle Eastern features as well. This is a classic Olmec head from Venta. It's been slightly damaged, unfortunately. And there's some other interesting long head sort of skulls, sort of miniature jadeite figures that have been discovered there. And this is a close-up of the pyramid. And many of, the more you look at these Olmec sites, the more you find these connections with Egypt. I mean, this little guy here, this little sort of crying baby figure who's sitting down. He actually looks particularly Egyptian when you look at the sort of headdress and the kind of carvings upon him. And it's an absolutely fascinating place, Venta. I mean, it's the only Olmec site that's really left you can actually visit anymore. I happened to go there during rainy season, so no one else was there at all. I had the whole place to myself. But this is like, I mean, the mound there, or the pyramid, is like Silbury Hill. It's about the same size as Silbury Hill, bigger than Merlin's mound, but definitely the same kind of structure, although originally it was more shaped like a pyramid. And incidentally, this is also where this great energy line travels through, which is something I researched myself. One of the reasons I went there, this great energy line, actually called the Plumed Serpent, which actually links with the legends of the area, the Quetzalcoatl or Cuckoo Clan, who was known as the Plumed Serpent in that part of the world, going back into prehistory. And these are some of the sites it goes through, including Palenque. This is the great Plumed Serpent energy current, this one here, the one that goes kind of underneath Africa. And then you have the Great Rainbow Serpent, the top one. That is an extension of the Michael and Mary line. So actually we're virtually touching the Rainbow Serpent. I think it's just over there somewhere, just a few yards away from where we're standing and sitting. And these are two great hooped energy currents that kind of circle the planet. And I've been sort of tracking these on and off over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And down in South America, they actually meet in the Island of the Sun in Lake Titicaca. But they go through all this part of the Americas, you see, as well, which I find particularly interesting. And here's an unfortunate photo of me actually at the coast of Quetzalcoatl. This is on the Gulf Coast. This is traditionally where Quetzalcoatl and his band of followers arrived in Mexico, going back into deep prehistory. No one knows when it was. And he was like a tall man with a group of people working, and he arrived on a raft of serpents and started traveling through the different lands, talking to all the local people there, and this, that, and the other. And he actually brought all these great arts of civilization, supposedly, to the land, to the people there, because all the different cultures, even up to the time of the Spanish conquest, even the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltecs, the Zapotecs, Mixtecs, all the different cultures, always had revered the ancient Quetzalcoatl people. You know, and they all talked about them. They still had ceremony and rituals and other things associated with them, as though they were a real bunch of people who came over and taught all these arts of civilization. Here's just some images, some traditional images. These are the Aztec ones. This is actually up at Teotihuacan. There's a pyramid of Quetzalcoatl at Teotihuacan, the great pyramid site near Mexico City. And Tula is the same. That's all dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. Cholula, which is the largest pyramid in the world, which is near Puebla, southeast of Mexico City. They say it was built by Quetzalcoatl himself, going back into prehistory. But when you keep looking at these carvings in the Olmec sites, you realise that perhaps it was a real person, and he did have a beard. He was pale-skinned. Who was he? Where did he come from? And one speculation is that he actually arrived around 3114 BC and began the calendar then on his arrival. And interestingly, you know, if you look at the pharaonic, culture in Egypt, that began basically in around 3100 BC or 3114 BC, which is what I think it was. And the first pharaoh, the Scorpion King, or Menes, actually appeared then, and that's when their culture began, even though there was prehistoric cultures going back potentially 10 or 20,000 years before that, the followers of Horus and others. And so that kind of era is really interesting. So it seems like something happened around the world, not just in Mexico, but also in Egypt, when pharaonic cultures began, but also in Britain and Europe, and possibly in other countries, where the megalithic construction all sort of really took off around that time as well. And many of the great megalithic sites we know about are actually dated to that particular time. This just shows you the full flow of where the energy current goes. I sort of tracked it mainly up there, but found it again in Capan. There's not that many sites in this main central part here. But there was one particularly interesting, very energetic altar, which was at Venta. It had actually been moved from Venta and is now in Villahermosa, in Venta Park. And you can see here, I don't know if you can see this clearly, but the guy who's emerging from that altar is kind of holding down a serpent against the ground. And then if you look on the top left there, you can see an arm, which is the arm of like a queen or a princess or a goddess, turning into a serpent and travelling around. She's on the side, around the side of this particular altar. And it comes around here and it's being held down by the shaman guy emerging from the rock. So I think that's really interesting. So to me, that's a symbol of earth energies and sort of trying to harness the natural earth energies which are present there, because we know that they were building upon magnetic anomaly sites. And this serpent symbolism keeps coming up, and I think it's all connected with Quetzalcoatl, but there's also some calendar significance here. This is something that's John Major Jenkins and others have been looking at Chichen Itza.
Yeah, so every equinox we may have heard about this at Chichen Itza, the pyramid of Kukulkan, which was built by the Toltecs who came down from the north. And the Mayan word for Quetzalcoatl, the winged snake, the winged serpent, is Kukulkan. So this is a pyramid to celebrate Kukulkan, the snake god. And every equinox, as the afternoon sun goes down in the sky, you get a shadow play on the pyramid, and it seems like there's a giant snake wriggling down the pyramid, which is accentuated by these stone serpent heads at the bottom. What Jenkins discovered was that this particular species of rattlesnake, Crotalus dorissus, it has 7 segments in the tail. 13 segments in the tail, and the Maya call them zan, the rattle. And that's the same word that they use for the Pleiades constellation. Jenkins then realised that there is a little marking on the dorissus rattlesnake just similar to the hieroglyph, which means sun. So he found out with his astronomical software that sure enough there is a conjunction of the Pleiades with the zenith sun over the top of this pyramid at that particular latitude, which starts just around 2012 and goes on for 360 years, because it takes quite a long time to finish because of the width of the Pleiades is a few degrees. So in 2012 that will happen on the 20th of May, which is 60 days after the spring equinox, when we get the shadow play. And Jenkins puts it forward that this actual pyramid is a kind of alarm clock to bring our attention to the return of this Quetzalcoatl, which you could interpret in several ways, of course. So you could interpret as a person, or as some people think, and there is some evidence for this, that it's about Kundalini energy, because Jenkins has also discovered that there's a now lost codex from the Aztecs, which is he's helped to decipher it from someone who memorized it, but basically it talks exactly about the same thing as the Kundalini. There's these energizable power points going up the spine, and a life energy which is situated in the bottom one, and under certain circumstances can rise up the spine, causing enlightenment when it gets to the top. It's all in this codex, which is called the Pyramid of Fire. That's the title that Jenkins brought the book out under, anyway. What's the next one? The symbolism of the snake comes from this Crotalus dorissus you see here, and there's 13 rattles, and there are 13 scales around the mouth, and you can see the little pyramid shapes on it, and that exact shaping of that zigzagging effect can be found all over Maya textiles and the design of their buildings and everything. It's all over the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl at Teotihuacan. And here you can see the head of Quetzalcoatl inside the snake, which also has another meaning to do with 2012, because when the god's head is inside the mouth of the snake, or alternatively the jaguar toad or the crocodile, it represents the sun inside the dark rift of the Milky Way. The central bulge of the Milky Way with a dark rift is where the sun is on the 21st of December 2012. It crosses the galactic plane right on the dark rift, and this is what Jenkins is saying. This is what he calls galactic alignment. It's actually a 36-year process, and 2012 is in that time window for the winter solstice sun to cross the galactic plane. So this meaning of snake is all wrapped up with that, plus the fact that it sheds its skin, so it's about rebirth. And it's even appeared in a crop circle there where it's represented as the Ouroboros, which brings in ecliptic and cycles. So it has several different meanings. So yes, Hugh did me a really big favour here, and on his tour of America went to visit the site of Tortuguero for me. So unfortunately, these are pictures from Tortuguero. It's been totally smashed to bits now. They built a cement factory on it in the 80s, and then the people who ran that got the army to use it for target practice so that they wouldn't have to get any bother from the planning people. So unfortunately, that's a fragment of the Tortuguero Monument 6, the only monument to mention in 2012, which was found there. It's now in the Villa Hermosa Museum. Unfortunately, the Villa Hermosa Museum has been shut for how many years?
No, I think it's opening this year.
It's opening this year?
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Jenkins recently managed to get in there with a little team of people and photograph it close up just a few months ago. Mm-hmm. But anyway, back in 2006, we had the first translation of this when it came out. There was only a few miners who knew about this. And in 2006, one of them actually dared to come out and tell everybody about it. And this is not this is not his version. This is a version of another translator. But basically, it's the 13th Baction will be terminated on 4 Hau, 3 Kankin. It will happen. Darkness. It will be the descent of the Bolognotti. That's the so-called 9 support gods to the, and they couldn't finish it because there's damage to the last parts here. You can see on the next, well, in a minute you'll see a better slide of that. But because of this coming out, they said at the time this is going to cause a bit of hoo-ha, and sure enough, now everyone's talking about 2012. The miners have started, as I mentioned just now, to deny that there's any substance to this whole 2012 thing at all. Before that Tortuguero monument was discovered, they said there's nothing in the inscriptions to indicate that they were at all interested in 2012. It's all been made up by New Age people. Of course, then when it actually came out there was something, they said there's only one inscription that mentions 2012, so, you know, it's pretty insignificant. And in fact, Stephen Houston said, Monument 6 has nothing to do with prophecy or the supposed dread events that await us in 2012. About that, the Maya are notably silent, or, truth be told, a bit boring. They don't want to admit it has any significance at all, because their words will be twisted by the media into saying it's got something to do with catastrophe, apocalypse, etc. And then Mark Van Stone's recently written a book about the subject, and he says Houston is right, it is a bit boring. And this is one of their new little tacks that they're coming up with now. Anyways, you'll see it's not quite as boring as they try and make out. This is the whole of the monument. The various parts of it are spread around. The couple of bits there are in the hands of a private collector. That's the bit you saw, G, which is in Villa Hermosa. A, D and C are all in Villa Hermosa, and B is in the museum in New York City. So yes, it was completed in 510 AD, the shrine for which it was to commemorate. The monument was erected 669 AD, the site was discovered in 1915, first study published in 1978, destroyed in 1981, and the first published study in English in 2006 by Sven Gronemeyer. And I managed to get hold of Sven's German translation, which I translated into English with the help of a German friend. And basically, it says, after the preamble, it was completed for rebirthing. That's nascent becoming is how the German translated there. The Pibna, that's an underground house or a becoming ripe house, of Akalkuk. It was 2 days, 9 winnows, 3 turns, 8 returns, 3 bactions before the 13th baction is completed on 4 Hau, 3 Kankin. Then it will happen, darkness and Bolognotti will descend to the... Now Bolognotti, Bolon means 9, Ok can mean dog, T can mean tree, or and the Ku means god. So Bolognotti Ku can be translated as the 9-legged god, the 9-footed god, the 9-rooted tree, 9-dog tree. There's variations. Anyway, the point is, transliteration, which is favoured by these people, actually doesn't make a lot of sense because they take it so literally to retain accuracy. If you translate it into something we can understand, you'll get something like, this precious stone was set up in the shrine portal 158 years through 38 days after the 7th of December 510 AD, when Akal-Cook's rebirthing shrine was completed. This is 1502 years, 14 days before the end of the current era on December 21st, 2012 AD. Then it will happen. Darkness and the descent of 9 underworld gods to the... Because it's now established that the 9 Bolognotti gods are probably the same as the 9 gods of the underworld. Anyway, that wasn't boring enough for them. Because Sven brought out a new study. I saw the pre-publication version of that. He'd redrawn it. They got a new photographs of the thing, and they managed to realise that the darkness glyph, that one there, actually isn't darkness after all. But they did loads of work on this glyph here to put forward possible translations for it. So, and then Mark Van Stone brought his book out. He had a look at the conversation about this, which was between all these. That's Gronemeyer, that's MacLeod, this is Van Stone, this is David Stewart, the world's famous child prodigy, and David Grove, and Christian Fraser, I think that one is. These people are all involved in this conversation about what this right-hand flange of this monument means. Yeah, so you go on to the next one. So in his book, Van Stone comes up with this as a translation. Will have incompleted the 13th Bacton will happen the witnessing attending of display of Bolognotti in the great impersonation development of costume and regalia. Very, very boring. That was his intention. But when Gronemeyer's translation came out, it turned out that these 3 glyphs they had retranslated as sea as seeing, Bolognotti holds, or a great encircling. That gives us some alternative translations. Yeah. Such as, this was his first version, it will be completed the 13th Bacton, 4 how 3 Cankin, it will happen a seeing. He, Bolognotti, holds, shows in a great encircling. And then he actually says, Houston was right, it is a bit boring. Unbelievable. But during the course of this work, he gave all these different words that could be used to translate those words and have been in the past translations. So, for example, he shows demonstrates could be dilute, dissolve, prepare coffee, avoid, evade, detour, dissolve. You know, there's all these different variations you could come up with, and that gives us some much more interesting combinations. And I'll give you a few examples. You could have, and there will be a revelation, there will be an apparition, people's eyes will be opened, there will be mass visions or perceptions will pierce the veil. They're all based on those other words that have been used before. And for the other part, again, Bolognotti will be imprisoned or sealed in a great enclosure. Bolognotti will make the coffee. Bolognotti will reveal a huge crop circle. Yes. Bolognotti will be proclaimed as Godfather. Bolognotti will start a great whirling. Bolognotti will offer a great prayer. Bolognotti will proclaim the great wedding or the spiritual wedding. Now these things are all just as significant and applicable, I think. And so you come up with these 3 alternative translations from me. At the completion of the 13th Bacton on 4 how 3 Cankin, there will be a mass hallucination as the deity 9 Dog Tree reveals the circle of tutelary gods. You should choose your favourite, by the way. At the completion of the 13th Bacton 4 how 3 Cankin, there will be a mass enlightenment where the 9-footed god inaugurates the spiritual wedding. Or, at the completion of the 13th Bacton 4 how 3 Cankin, the veil will dissolve when the 9-fold god encircles the ecliptic. And this, one of my favourites, at the completion of the 13th Bacton 4 how 3 Cankin, there will be the apocalypse, literally meaning revelation or seeing, when the 9 gods of the underworld, as these guys say that's official, put everything in order. Much better, eh? Yeah. So who are these 9 gods that are going to return? As I said, Prager and Gronemeyer both said that they are equivalent to this guy here, who's the chief god of the underworld. You always see smoking a cigar, and one of the clues is on this skeletal centipede wrapped around him are 9 little feet, meaning that it's the 9-footed god, the same person. And you can see in the Underworld, there he is, and the Olmecs glyph is right in front of him there. And he's smoking a cigar there as well, actually. So in the very final version of Gronemeyer's work that he did with Barbara MacLeod, it was a slight improvement. He said that what he thinks this Tortuguero monument was about is that the king of Tortuguero was going to see himself in the future, in 2012, presiding over a ceremony where there would be something very similar to what happens every year in Santiago Atitlan, when this statue called Mashimon is dressed up, given lots of tobacco, and he's always got a cigar in his mouth. And they sort of worship him for several days, and then eventually they string him up and chop him to pieces. Very similar to what happens every year in Hastings on 1st of May when they bring the Jack in the Green up to the castle and rip it to pieces. It's the end of one time period and the beginning of a new one. And anyway, it could be the dark god retreating into the dark. Yeah. So finally, this one was in the very final version. It's 4-hour 3-cank, it will happen as seeing it's the display of Bolognotti in the Great Investiture. They've watered it down a bit, but I think you're getting the gist of what this could be about. Anyway, Jenkins has also done some great research recently with 2 of those Mayanists who are kind of a bit like double agents. Interesting thing, this represents all the dates on the whole of that monument and all the interrelationships between those dates. And very often he's found with his astronomical software that those dates correspond to significant astronomical alignments with the dark rift. All these red bits are the dark rift, usually involving Jupiter, Mercury, Saturn or the Moon or Venus. But the interesting thing there was that the actual king of Tortuguero was born when the sun was in the dark rift and died at the same time as well, as if that was engineered. You see, was born, well, it says somewhere on there that he actually died when the sun was in the dark rift as well. So there's all these messages about the dark rift, which is about galactic alignment and the 2012 alignment. Yeah. And this is the thing that connects up Hugh's studies and mine, because this was found at Comwalcalco, and in December '09, Eric Boot said, this is about 2012. The 4-hour 3-cank arrives, it will be completed. But in fact, then Mark Zender said, no, it doesn't mean that. It means 4-hour 3 Zul, he arrives at Zuk-Cank, which has got nothing to do with it. But the interesting thing was, it's got some sub-Saharan script called Malinki alongside it, which implies a connection between the African continent and the Central America.
So yeah, Palenque, you get there's a lot of references to the 9 gods there as well. This is something that Geoff's obviously been researching. And I was surprised to find that around the main tomb of Pakal, Lord Pakal, who was supposedly a giant, by the way. He was supposed to be like 8 or 9 foot tall, according to the people who actually excavated originally. And also out in the courtyard as well, there's all these large stucco pieces around that represent the 9 gods. So the references keep coming up in different ages and different cultures that seem to have a high awareness of these types of calendars. And like you get it right from the Olmec era all the way up to the late Mayan and even some of the Aztec. And I think the thread that sort of comes through this is not only Quetzalcoatl but the 9 gods and some of the legends that keep popping up.
Oh yeah, this is just a quick resume of who these 9 gods are. Various glyphs that have shown them, various names for them: 9-dog tree, 9-footed god, jaguar-foot tree, gods of warfare, conflict, dangerous transition times. This is all from official sources. Social unrest, eclipses, natural disasters like earthquakes, the end of Bactans, appeared when the Spanish arrived, assisted the creation of the current world, will be present at the next creation, which is 2012.
Yeah, it's not. There you go.
Oh, we've had that one.
Oh, yes. So we're coming back now to, there's a site called Izapa, which is something that John Major Jenkins has been researching extremely thoroughly. And there's just a few bits and bobs there. I mean, he's based his galactic alignment theory and his 2012 cosmology theory upon the carvings, decoding the carvings there. I've just got some nice pretty pictures of when I was there. But one of the things that keeps coming up at these sites, one of the things that I think is connected with how they could foresee the future and how they could possibly go back into the past as well, was lots and lots of evidence of psychotropic medicines, including the psilocybin mushroom, which is prevalent in Central America. But also on the left there, you can see the bufo, possibly the bufo marinus toad, which is a very high, has a very high strength DMT, 5-MeO DMT, excreted from its shoulders. If you harass it with a stick, it will sort of pump out its poison from its shoulders at you or something like that. And you can actually take that, dry it and smoke it, and it's the most powerful hallucinogen on the planet. And there's been a lot of speculation that that may be how they had their visionary ideas about these calendars, something that Terence McKenna and John Major Jenkins and others have gone into. But you've got a bit of more detail about the frogs, haven't you?
Well, on Erowid, which is the sort of encyclopedic resource for hallucinogenic substances, they say that the bufo marinus toad is the Colorado cane toad, which only contains bufotenine, and there's argument about how hallucinogenic that is. But the bufo alvarius, they say, is the one, which you can see, it looks very, very similar. That contains the 5-MeO DMT as well. And there you can see an Aztec, from an Aztec codex there, someone waving their mushrooms around.
And they found in San Lorenzo, up in the Olmec heartland, which is much further back up north on the Gulf Coast, they found hundreds, they found a little sort of area, like a little ceremonial area, where they found hundreds of these bufo toads, bones, suggesting that they were using them and they were breeding them or whatever, and so using the DMT that sort of came out of their shoulders. So, and then you get the same carvings all the way through southern Guatemala, which is where the Olmecs kind of diffused through. And in the Zapa and Abash-Takalik and many other sites.
I've found these connections between DMT and 2012, because a lot of the people who've had contemporary visions about 2012 have either been taking these substances or, rings a bell, or they've basically been having an altered state of consciousness, like out-of-body experience or hypnotic regression into the future, or near-death experience, all these things that have been shown by Rick Strassman to be associated with internal secretion of DMT into the bloodstream. And the 2012 connection, which Strassman has also toyed with in private, which I've repeated the conversation in my book, but basically he speculates that it's possible that a certain environmental trigger around 2012 might kick people's pineal gland as a trigger into secreting DMT, possibly by the fact that there is a little magnetite crystals in there, and if we had a large movement of the Earth's magnetic field, you would get a mass visioning, as currently happens to people with schizophrenia and temporal lobe epilepsy.
I'm just going to skip through a few slides here, and these are just some holiday snaps I've just left in. But there's actually, this is one from Quirigua, which is again in southern Guatemala. If you want to just quickly mention this one, Geoff.
Yeah, this is called the Creation Stela, because this is the one which helped them to work out that the start of the 13 back to cycle was 3114 BC. Because basically you have an introducing glyph, which is there, then 13 Bactons, 0 Ktun, 0 Tun, 0 Weanal, 0 days, 4 Ahau, 8 Kumku, and that's how we would write that date there. And when they finally worked out when that was, it was August the 11th, 3114 BC.
Okay, so we're going to get on to the funky last bit now. Crops, there's a crystal skull. Right, the crop circles. There's a few little bits we've got about 5 minutes left, Geoff, so we should just quickly go through these.
So yes, of course, we have a great interest in crop circles, and almost from the start, there's been this connection with the Maya calendars. We had this one here, which was connected with something that was going on in Glastonbury at the symposium at the time, where they had a meditation to produce a crop circle, and this one appeared near Silbury Hill, and it was 33 of these little flames, which is 20 plus 13, and 20 times 13 is 260, so people made the immediate connection to the Maya calendars, because 260 days in the Tzolk'in, 260 Katuns in the 13 Baxter cycle. And then this one here, we had 18 of these squiggly things and 20 circles around the edge. 18 times 20 is 360, which is 1 tun, 1 360-day year from the long count. And then here, this turned up to be an exact copy of a diagram that Jose Arguelles did in the Mayan factor back in '87 to show the 13 Baxter cycle, particularly with its 2012 endpoint at the top there. And you can see here there's like a little orbit with the Earth just going through one of the tram lines as it was on a transition point there around this 13 Baxter cycle. And then this one here, in 2000, it was 20 by 20, which is 400 tuns are 1 Bacton, which is 20 Katuns. And this one here at Etchelhampton in 97, 26 by 30, 780 squares, 780 days is 1 cycle of the planet Mars, which is equivalent to exactly 3 Tzolk'ins. It's 146 Weanals as well, if you're interested. And this one, fascinating one, they called it "The Earth is Missing." Immediately everyone went, "Oh my God, the Earth's missing, where's the Earth gone?" But in fact, it was a very clever way of describing the position of the planets on the day that it appeared from below. But from above, it described position of the planets in the future as well. So it was actually referring to a date in the future. And it also was connected with Venus, because there's 65 of these. And I've got the figures here somewhere. There are 65 Venus cycles in one Venus round. But there are also 65 Bactons in 5 13 Bacton cycles. And that seems to have been echoed in this one. But it also, I mean, it showed basically where Earth should have been. I mean, it showed, that's what it was encoding here, is the fact that this was something that was during the retrograde loop of Venus. Every 584 days, we kind of overtake Venus, and it does a little loop. And over 8 years, it makes this pentagram in the sky. And that's what this was actually describing, something that was happening in one of those loops. And it referred to 2 loops in the future as well, which were also the same. Now this one, they immediately called it the Doomsday Formation. The reason that the press called it that was because it had some little glyphs in it that looked Mayan. So they made the immediate association, Mayan, Doomsday. But somebody who described it, C. Lewis, actually came up with this really elaborate theory as to what it meant, but everybody was totally wowed by it, but he'd actually miscounted the number of little stripes there, so the whole theory fell to pieces in the end. You have to check these people with their crazy theories. That includes me, of course. Then this one, this was said by Jaime Masson in this actual hall a few years ago. He decoded this, and it had 20 of these G-like things around the edge. 20 is a very familiar figure in Maya calendrics. There's 4 lots of groups of 13 bars there. 4 13s are 52 years in the calendar round, plus 13 times 20 is 260, giving us another favourite Maya number. Immediately, too much in common with Maya calendars not to be meaning something. He said what this means is that central moon-like thing is an eclipse, referring to the same thing as this, the eclipse that happened 60 days after the spring equinox in 2012. And then he said, if you go from that in May the 20th, count these little things, there are 16 of them, add 16 to May the 20th, and you come up with a Venus transit in America, it's on the 5th of June 2012, over here it's the 6th of June. So basically, Jaime Masson said this is 16 days added onto the eclipse gives you the Venus transit in 2012. And that was to do with Quetzalcoatl. Right, next one. It's not doing anything.
No.
We have the whirling beach ball from hell. as Louis called it.
It's that one there, Avebury Manor one. I'll start talking about.
This one appeared just down the road at Avebury and showed the... Oh, back one. Yeah. It showed the exact position of all the planets in the solar system on the 23rd of December 2012. 2 days after most people think that the getting back to cycle finishes, though there is one correlation that implies the 23rd. The only difference was Pluto is 30 degrees off, so some people started saying maybe it's not Pluto, maybe it's something else. We can speculate as to what, but here's one from this year, which if we use the same kind of decoding which Jaime Masson used, which I just explained on this one here up at that long barrow, what's it called?
West Kennet? East Kennet?
No, the one up on the Ridgeway. Wayland Smithy, thank you. Yes, that appeared near Wayland Smithy. This one, East Kennet, another long barrow, just very recently on the 22nd. Now, you remember I said he counted these things, 16 after the eclipse. Well, here again we have 20 pyramids around the edge. Now, it looks like there are 10, but there are actually 20 if you count them in 2 directions. That's 1, and that's 2, and that's 3, and that's 4. There's 20 altogether. Now, if that's the moon, there are 17 of these things here. 17 moons, 17 months after the day that it was discovered on the 22nd of July. So it was probably laid down the previous night, 21st of July. 17 Gregorian months after that brings us to the 21st of December 2012. I think I'm the first person to say that, but I'm not sure. Anyway, this one, Hugh rang me up excitedly saying, crop circles appeared in Mexico. And it's got something to do with the planets Elenin and the position of the moon, etc. I said, no, I think it's just a Mexican holding a frying pan.
But it's actually right in the old Olmec, sort of Mexico City heartland. There's the position of it. I haven't had a chance to check it all out yet, but it's sort of in between Teotihuacan, Tula, and Cholula. Sort of, so it's in a really interesting area geodetically, if you look at it from an ancient sites perspective. But as Geoff said, it could just be a frying pan. And this is just our last little funny, really.
This has been going around the internet quite a lot recently.
Thank you.